when I'm stressed, when I'm anxious, I'm more worried about me. In fact, the science would say as anxiety goes up, empathy goes down. So the more anxious I am, the less likely I'm going to practice kindness. When I'm hungry,
Yeah. I need to eat.
hangry,
Yeah, hangry.
dude,
That's where that
kindness
comes
is
from.
harder.
Yeah.
Right? When I'm angry, when I'm upset, when I'm hurting, when I'm suffering, when I'm disgruntled, any number of the myriad of feelings that you and I feel on any given day, when you consider most of them actually make kindness harder. And so if I don't feel like being kind, most people aren't going to go out of the way to choose something that we don't feel like doing. And that's which is why I would say that kindness is almost always a sacrifice to do something you don't feel like. It's to choose someone else's good over your own.
Purpose in the Youth. Purpose in the Youth podcast. Welcome back to the Purpose in the Youth podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Purpose in the Youth podcast with your favorite bearded man, the one, the only Bobbbaaaay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Purpose in the Youth podcast with your favorite bearded man, the one, the only Bobbbaaaay. Today in the podcast studio, Houston Kraft. How are you, my friend?
Hopefully your other favorite bearded man. That's
you
like,
are the
that's
other
the
favorite
goal.
bearded man. But I did see in some of your pictures you would go clean shaven and then you grow it out. What's the story? Are you a beard guy or are you kind of on the fence about it?
We've committed now.
You've committed.
Yeah. Not as well as you've committed.
No,
but yeah.
There's only one. There's only one, ladies and gentlemen. How do the parents feel about it? Because I feel like sometimes it's a big factor. My mom always is like, you need to get that out of here.
When it was unkept, not a big fan.
Yeah.
But now that we've toned it back.
When you maintain it, they're like, you know what, Houston, we like this.
It's an indication
you
of
can
our
keep that
health.
going.
Yeah.
I think it makes us look like men, you know, like we're real men out there working.
We're trying
to change the world.
I need it all stacked for me to look like a man. Yeah.
One beard at a time. One beard at a time. You spoke to over 600 schools at this time, as of today. Do you ever get nervous anymore?
Yeah.
You do?
A lot.
Really?
Yeah.
And what's the process like going through your head walking? Like you spoke today, right? Out in Thousand Oaks at a middle school.
Yep.
Walking into that school today, what are you reciting in your head?
Well, we talked about it right before we pressed record, man, that idea that you get nervous, even though this is your 100th-something podcast. And I think there's a different, when you first start something, the nervousness looks a lot different than when you're couple hundred in.
Yeah.
And I think you said it well. When it's important to you, you don't want to waste other people's time.
Yeah.
And I think there's a really, like a different kind of nervous where it's like, I want to provide value for you. And I want to serve you to the best of my ability. And so my nervousness doesn't come from how's this going to look? Are they going to like me? Which for a long time, it was pretty ego-driven. Mm-hmm. The nervousness now is like, am I serving the work well?
Yeah.
And can I show up and make people feel like their time, what I've given them in this time is worth it?
Yeah, you want to give them something of value. Because at the end of the day, they could hire or bring any other speaker to come into the school. And the fact that they're picking Houston, it's like you want to make sure that you hold up to that and even deliver even more value so that they bring you back 3 more times that year.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes the pressure is good because that's when it forces us to pretty much act in our full potential. And we know there's our backs against the wall. We got to go all in on this moment and try to deliver like the best of our ability.
Yeah. I feel like the gigs for me that have gone the best are the moments where I look out in the audience and there's someone there. Not only do I want to value every person's time, but when there are people in the audience who have shown up for me or supported me or loved on me, like I feel a sense of responsibility to show them that it's been worth the investment.
So it's got to be like a high because to me it's a high even just in this room. Like there's gonna be me, you, and Kirk for the next hour plus, and you're gonna leave. I'm gonna be like, I just blacked out. I don't even know what just happened. But you're speaking in front of groups of people, like hundreds of people. And that to me, that just speaks. I can't even imagine what is going through that process because there's so much going through my head in this very second. But to then do that live in front of so many people, my hat is off to you. Like when we shout out to Zach Conover, because if I didn't go visit Zach that night, I never would have met you. But that night that we met and you were pretty much just kind of telling me what you were doing and, that you had spoken in front of 600 schools, I'm sitting there thinking, wow, like that is I don't want to say that's something I dream to do one day, but the idea of speaking in front of people and in front of an audience is something I would love to do. And to meet somebody that has been doing it for so long and still is, I was so impressed just to hear that. And that's why there was no questions asked. Like, I knew getting home, I was like, I'm not going to send him a DM right now or an email because that's a little aggressive. But in a couple days, I'm going to let him marinate. And then I'm going to hit him and tell him I need him in the studio.
It was well marinated, man. No, I appreciate it.
Well marinated.
The process of being in front of lots of people is, it becomes similar, like over time, I think, to what we're doing here. And I think my goal in the work has always been to make it conversational. Like what we're doing here, it should be the same on stage. Because no one likes to be talked at or talked down to. So. No. We gotta figure out ways to like make those 600 people, those 5,000 people feel like it's just you and I.
Yeah, and
so this is a good setup for any of the work.
Yeah, you're right, and you do a good job of that because from the videos that I had seen of speaking times that you had, you were good. You would engage the people and kind of get people talking, and I think that's what really makes the best speaking environments, because there's so many times that I can think back as a kid, show up to an assembly and like the person stands up there and talks for 45 minutes. I'm like, okay, cool. But there was always that one guy I remember that would come into our school and he wouldn't be on the stage. He'd be walking up and down the alley. And so you're just like, okay, is he gonna come call me out? Like I need to make sure I'm like listening. But I think it's important to keep people's attention, probably to interact with them and show like, yes, I care about you. I see you. And that's why I'm asking you a question.
Yeah.
Before we even get into any of that real stuff, I want to paint this picture of Houston's childhood. You were born in Maine, so shout out to the East Coast. I like that. I like that. 2 points. 2 points. You were raised in. Tell me if I said this.
Is there a scoreboard that I need to be keeping track of?
No. I apologize if I butcher this. Is it Snohomish, Washington?
Snohomish.
Okay.
Yeah, you're not the first.
Yeah, I'm terrible with pronunciation. Horrible. What's this place like for you growing up?
So lived in Maine until I was 4. Dad got a new job. We moved cross country to Seattle.
One side to the other.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't get much farther.
Back of the minivan, they built me like a bed back there for this trip, and I just watched Star Wars on VHS.
Do you still remember it? You remember that? Yeah.
Stopped at Mount Rushmore. We stopped at all like the key classic spots.
Yep.
Then got to Washington. I lived in Issaquah for a little while, and then eventually moved to Snohomish, is where like I grew up mainly.
Mainly.
Nice. we're winning whatever the game is. Snohomish was good, man. It was a big town with a small town feel. And the thing that I loved about it was it's like rooted in tradition and had a lot of unique things because it was very traditional.
Yeah.
The thing that it could use work on is that it's rooted in tradition. And so for me, like, it's a fairly white bread place, and a lack of diversity, I think, was, I wish there was more.
Yeah.
Like, I wish there was more growing up just for the exposure piece, but I loved it. I had a tough time in elementary school. I grew up pretty short. I didn't grow until like sophomore year of high school.
Okay. Did that bother you for a long time?
Yeah, I mean, I just like anytime we're different, anytime we're outside of the norm in any direction, right? Whether it's size or shape or color of our skin or beliefs, whatever it is. Kids especially are good at finding the different thing and making fun of the different thing. So I was short. I was a new kid for a while when I first moved to elementary school in Snohomish. I was part of this class that was like a 4th, 5th, 6th grade split class. It was like an honors type class, and like literally the first day I showed up to school, I realized it was the kid that it was the class that everyone made fun of at my school.
Oh, no.
So I just spent a lot of time being like frustrated with school, but I also at the same time like loved school. I loved what I did in that class. It was very like creative. It pushed me. Middle school was a fun adventure, as it is for most of us.
It's that middle ground of like, we're getting older, but not older, but we're starting to, things are kind of happening, and there's a lot of
nothing was happening for me.
Yeah.
I was just trying to figure out.
Yeah.
No, I had a weird incident that we could get into if we wanted to. I accidentally brought an airsoft gun to school.
I read that. Yeah. I read that online. I was like, how does this happen?
Dude, airsoft was like a new thing at the time.
Yeah.
I went over to my friend Kyle Fadenrack's house. We played, threw all my stuff in my bag. Next day at school, I had no idea it was in the bottom of my bag. I'd taken out like the orange thing that's at the front that shows you it's not a real
safety.
gun. Yeah,
it's exactly. A safety hazard.
And it's all black. So at the bottom of my bag, I realize I have this airsoft gun. And I turn to my friend. I'm like, I got to call my mom. And all of a sudden, this girl, Taylor Bass, she overhears me, goes and tells the principal. Mr. Hart walks up and he goes, Houston, do you have a gun in your bag? And I'm like, I'm going to call my mom, I swear. And this was not too long after Columbine. Man. So literally no tolerance. Even though I was like straight A's, like honors type kid, they expelled me for a full calendar year.
Full year?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So I went through the whole appeals process, and it ended up being a 2-month suspension.
So they toned it down.
Yeah.
They just gave you 2 months suspension.
After like a lot of work.
Yeah, I'm sure you had to really like say, I didn't mean to bring this, and obviously I wasn't trying to do it.
I brought in like character witnesses and the whole deal. But you know, the whole pain into purpose thing, almost simultaneously, my mom was working at a jewelry store and it got robbed, and she got pepper sprayed, and it was like a whole terrifying nightmare. And so she was all freaked out, but I was suspended, so I got to be home hanging with her. And as a family, we like went to Mexico and like recovered together.
See you guys in 2 months.
Yeah, exactly.
See you guys in 2 months.
And the only class I couldn't keep up with was math. And to make a really long story as short as possible, getting into high school, because I had started taking a different math class as a result of this thing, I hate it. I used to love math, and then I grew to like really not like it. And so I stopped math sophomore year, and I started taking theater.
Yeah.
And I started taking speech and debate and drama and leadership and all the things that now inform everything I do. Today.
What got you into that? Like, what was the interest in theater? Because that's to go from math to then theater, like that's a huge transition. You know what I mean? Like, I like math. We're gonna translate that into physics and try something. Like, you went from focusing and just like writing out and doing problems step by step to, no, I'm gonna stand on stage and literally talk in front of people.
Yeah.
What inspired you to do that?
Well, I was pretty like kind of an academic kid, and I also played soccer, like pretty competitive soccer growing up. And my freshman year of high school, went on a ski trip with some friends and broke my ankle. And I was supposed to be in a weight training class. That obviously didn't work out.
And then it didn't go well.
Then it's still now. And I ended up having to do an independent study with my English teacher, who happened to be the drama director.
Okay.
So she was like, your ankle's broken, you're not playing soccer, do you want to do the musical? And I was like, I can't sing. And she's like, I have the perfect part for you. There's a king who's mute, and you don't have to sing. And then
you just have to be there, right?
You got to mime stuff. I'm like, I can do that. So I showed up to audition, and she promised me I wasn't gonna have to sing, and then she made me sing Happy Birthday in front of everyone, and it was the worst rendition of Happy Birthday you've heard in a long time. But they cast me, and it's one of my favorite shows still. It's called Once Upon a Mattress. It's a parody of The Princess and the Pea, and the highlight of my freshman year was I mimed the birds and the bees talk to my son in this show, and I was like, theater's awesome. I want to play with this.
Sign me up.
Yeah, sign me up. So then I got into sophomore year, wasn't taking math anymore, started doing drama and speech and debate, and then my sophomore year, my health teacher, at the end of class one day was like, I think you should join student leadership. I think you'd be good at it. So I went to a conference for the first time, and I remember being at this conference and totally really not buying into student leadership in a lot of ways, because I always thought they were kind of hypocrites, and I always thought it was just sort of like putting on events and poster making or whatever the cliches that it is. And I went to this conference, and some guy got on stage. I literally don't remember what he talked about. I don't remember what it looked like. I don't remember his name, which is a good indication of the work that I do. But he did say one thing that wasn't his own, but it's a quote that at this point probably most people know. But my sophomore year or junior year of high school, when I first heard it, it's the Maya Angelou quote: "People will forget what you say, people will forget what you do, but people will never forget the way you make them feel." And the guy on stage said that, and I remember having this distinct moment of like, that's the truest thing I've ever heard. Right? Like, the moments that are most clear in my life are moments where I've been made to feel something. And I actually talk about this a lot in schools, the idea that we live forgettable lives, which is weird. And you said it yourself. You're like, I might be on 1,000 podcasts, and you say like, you want me to remember this one.
Yeah.
And I think, first of all, the intention for that is awesome. And then the action behind that is you're the kind of person that wants to run out and greet your guest, right?
Yeah.
You're the kind of person that like wants to set the stage for this to be memorable.
Yeah.
Well, it's not necessarily what you do. It's the way that like you've honored me by doing research before I get here, right? You've honored me by like wanting to be the person at the door greeting me. And that's so true about life as well, that the things that we're going to remember most clearly, it's weird when you think about it, how much we're going to forget.
I know.
And I think when we die, it's like we're going to remember 0.0001%.
Yeah.
So it's like the awareness of that, in some ways for me, changes the way that I treat people. And the awareness of that in some ways makes me more intentional with like what I want to put in that 1%, you know? But it's true for me. The moments in my life I remember most vividly are where I've been made to feel something, whether it's good or bad, you know, lovable or unlovable, worthy or unworthy.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like that moment in high school set the stage for me to go. My senior year, started a club at my school called Random Acts of Kindness, etc.
Rake, right? Yeah.
And we started doing kind stuff. And that was the whole premise, was once a week, you make time for kindness. Because it's one of those weird things that if you don't make time for it, it's usually the first thing that falls off the to-do list, right?
How did people react to that in school? Because I feel like sometimes, especially like I feel like in movies too, the kids that are trying to do the nice thing, like people are like, oh, like these guys are trying to be so good, and like, oh, they're trying to like preach kindness. Like, how did people react to that when you guys were starting up the club?
Yeah. I think the same way people react to anything that's outside of what's quote unquote normal, which is, oh, that's weird, or they question it, or they make fun of it, or they reject it. All the things that we normally do with things that we don't understand. And so we would get the question why a lot. Why are you doing this? And so our t-shirts were just a big yellow smiley face on the front, and on the back it just said, why not? That was like our whole thing.
I like that.
And I think, you know, there's part of it that the answer is why not. I think there's also a part of it that consistency breeds trust, right? So early on in the year, people are like, this is silly, this is nonsense, this is whatever. But as you show up week in, week out, and you keep wearing the shirts, and you keep going after the relationships, and you keep doing the thing, eventually people can't help, even if they don't like you, like over time they grow to respect you.
They respect
it. This guy keeps still doing it.
Why not? Let him do it.
Yeah. So, you earn those things, I think. But all that to say that, like, I brought a gun to school, and I brought a fake gun to school.
Fake gun. Make sure we get that right. I don't want people to think it's an airsoft gun.
And I think a better way to frame it, right, is that, like, a lot of times the things that feel like the end of the world, or that feel painful, or feels like you've been rejected, or something is messed up, oftentimes there's just a redirection, or
there's so many people that I've had on this podcast, even like in the last 15, 20 guests, where there's a moment like that happens in somebody's life, whether it's an injury or whatever it might be, but it's like this moment of, okay, can't actually keep walking this way, and so I have to go this way, like the injury with soccer for you. And there's so many times where we think, you know, I'm not saying you had dreams to become a professional soccer, but we have so much investment into one thing, and then all of a sudden when we're scared to make that transition, something better happens along the way. And I think one of the best things that I've ever learned is like the changing the perspective. And I call it flipping the switch, right? Like, are you looking at that injury as something negative, or are you looking at the positive, like, okay, well, in 6 months I'm going to be able to walk again. That's cool. And it's just going to give me time to try other things. But so many times that I personally just try to get myself to just believe things happen for a reason. And there's no religious beliefs behind that. It's just, I believe that if something bad happens today, something good's going to come of it tomorrow. And whether it's good karma, bad karma, I don't know what it is, but I just believe that something's going to work out. And so much too, I don't want to overlook what you kind of were talking about, like the whole idea of people kind of come and go through this world. And that is something that I get into these weird moments because I drive Uber full time. That's literally how I fund the project. It's how I fund my bills. And you know, I talk to a lot of people in my car. And every so often I get these people that, you know, they're listening to music, they're handling their business. And so it's just me in the open road, right? And so I'll be at a red light in West Hollywood or any part of LA. And so I do this weird thing where I kind of just glance around and I just look at the people around me, and I'm naturally curious. Like, if I could get out of my car, stop everything in this world, and go up to every single one of them and just be like, what's your purpose? What's your purpose? I'd be curious to hear, like, what these people have to say, because I think there are so many people in this world that are just going to come in and come out, and that there's only this very small percentage that actually leave an impact, like a legacy. And that to me is the goal, is to have that type of impact. But kind of what you were just touching on. Really, I'm just sitting there like jumping in my mind, like this is what it's all about. Like this is what this podcast is all about, is hearing stories like this where people that want to have that impact and what they're doing to make that kind of happen. Bowdoin College, what was the inspiration going there? And also, I was pumped to see you went. I don't like the way you're reacting.
No,
is it okay?
No, it's good.
Okay.
It's just it's a funny story. I, as a kid who was like pretty hyper involved and
Interesting too, by the way. You grow up in Maine, move out to Washington, and then you come right back to the East Coast to where you're from. What part of Maine were you from too? Also, I'm just curious.
Kennebunk.
Let's go, man.
You know.
Every year growing up, my parents still to this day, we spend a week in Wells Beach, Maine.
Really?
Every year.
Oh yeah, that's
every year. Kennebunk, let's go.
So part of it was my family, my mom's side of the family still lived there. Even when we moved to Seattle, we would go back every summer to visit my grandma and my aunts, my uncles. So a lot of them lived out there, so it was an easier transition that way. I made a face at you when you talked about Bowdoin College because my senior year of high school, I'd applied to 4 colleges, all of them pretty small liberal arts schools, 2 on the East Coast, 2 on the West Coast. First day of spring break, I get all 4 letters. They're all 4 rejection letters. Yeah.
To the 4 schools that you applied to.
To the 4 schools I applied to. But I'm like an only child. I didn't know the story of like, if it's an acceptance letter, it's usually the bigger package. So I still was on pins and needles every time I opened the little envelope. It's obviously a no.
But you don't know this.
I don't know.
You know this.
So I should qualify that. 2 of them I was waitlisted at. So I was waitlisted at Reed College in Oregon.
Okay.
And Bowdoin in Maine.
What were the other 2 that you applied to?
Whitman and Williams.
Okay.
And of course that's devastating. So I started questioning everything about my life and like what I'm going to do next. And I was thinking about taking a year off and doing random acts of kindness all around the country. And I had all these ideas. And then I get called that I got into Reed College in Oregon. I'm like all excited. I finally like a little bit of
college?
Yeah, this is like near the end of my senior year. But Reed is like super academic. They sent me the reading list ahead of time. And it's like, you need to read 400 books before you get here. And I was like, dude, I don't know if I'm ready for this. And then literally I'd graduated high school and it was towards the end of June, I get a phone call from Bowdoin. And I swear I'm the last person they let in.
No way.
Yeah, they must have been like, we got room for one
we need
more.
to pull him in.
Everyone's dropping out. Let's get this guy. And yeah, man, I show up and the first thing I did was run for freshman class president, and I made a video, like a lip sync video to "Where Is the Love."
Oh, wow.
And it was like the first 2 weeks of school, so no one knew anyone.
Yeah.
And so my goal was like to to build relationships by inviting people into the process of singing the video, singing the song with me.
Great way to break the ice with everybody.
Yeah.
Great way.
So I made this goofy video, including like the housekeeper in my dorm. She was like cleaning the bathroom and we're singing together and the hose is spraying and that set the stage for my time there. I ended up studying theater and English. Fast forward to going into my junior year, I was going to study abroad in Prague at a film school. Found out shortly before I was going to leave that the film school wasn't as legit as I thought it was.
No, it was just the program wasn't good, or
like I was going to invest too much money into something that was
not going to actually return.
Yeah, the ROI is not there.
Not there.
And that was like the advice given to me by someone that I trusted. And so I kind of like had another crisis of like, okay, I don't have my classes signed up for. I don't have a place to live at Bowdoin.
You had written out saying I'm going abroad.
Yeah, it was like I was out.
Oh wow.
And I was trying to get back in, and it was kind of weird. And so I decided I was going to go to LA and pursue acting. And en route to LA, while I was in Seattle, home for a little bit, my friend was interning with this company called Ignite that was doing mentorship programs in schools. And he called me up, and we'd met at a leadership camp going into my senior year of high school. And we became like fast friends at that camp. That camp changed my heart, my mind, my mindset around leadership and service and love. And he called me up. He's like, dude, I'm doing this thing with this company. We're just like playing games. You'd be good at it. You got to come hang out. So I show up and I start to facilitate. It's one of my favorite things to do is like facilitate basically like activity-based learning, right? Where you do a thing, you play a game, you experience something, and then there's like a conversation that happens. So it's not like I'm trying to teach you something. Yeah. It's like this conversation, we discover something together. Mm-hmm. And so I started leading some activities, and the people that ran the company were like, you need to stay around. We like you. And I was like, okay. So I ended up working for them for that whole year.
Because you couldn't go back to Bowdoin. You weren't going abroad, so you pretty much had a year to kill.
Well, I was gonna go to LA and do the acting thing, but I was like, I really like this. You know, the summer camp changed my life. Leadership camp, the conversations there changed my heart, my life, and I was like, I get to do this with kids. Like, I want to just try it. So I got to travel with them a little bit around the country, basically training upperclassmen kids to be role models for incoming freshmen. And then I went back to Bowdoin with this renewed sense of what I wanted to do, and so I started studying education. I was only able to afford, happily or comfortably one more year, and so I doubled down on my classes. To which my dean looked at me and was like, "You're an idiot." And I was like, "I'm gonna do it anyways." And so I took double the load of normal classes. And
are we literally talking how many classes a semester?
8 credits a semester, so it's normally 4 classes per semester, 1 credit per class.
Yeah.
So I was taking like 8. It was a lot. It was a bad idea for health, but a good idea for just like
to get it done,
save
done. You money.
And there was a couple classes that I couldn't finish just logistically, and so I ended up walking with my class at graduation, but not actually getting a diploma. So instead of getting a diploma, I got a letter from the registrar that was just like, "You're not done yet," and I still haven't finished. So
still haven't finished.
No, I still haven't finished.
Probably no plan of going back at this point.
There's, it's in my head, but it's also like I'm doing the work and I love the work, and I've learned so much in the trenches of the work. That, my education's right here, and so there might be one day where we go back. But
what are your thoughts on college today? Do you think people need to go there to be successful? Should people be, especially because you're speaking in front of high schools, like, are you dancing around that question? Are you what is your belief on college?
No, there's no dance, man. I actually gave a graduation speech a couple years ago, and it was about my little cousin. His name's Kieran. He started to play baseball, and the very first practice, all these like 3 and 4 year olds come together, and it's just it's a joke. It's a nightmare, right? And the coach is like literally trying to explain, and the first question he asks is like, "Okay, where's first base?" And literally all the kids are like, "It's over there." It's every direction you can imagine. Yeah. And so for the next hour, literally an hour, the coach is like, "Okay, this is," like, walks everyone to first base. Like, "This is first base. If you hit a single, this is where you go. This is second. If you hit a big one, this is third." And you go all the way around. It takes an hour to bring this like crew of bumblebees. And then finally, after an hour, he goes, "Where's first base?" And my cousin Kieran just takes off running towards third. And I laugh at that story because I think the world operates in a different way than it used to. Right? It used to be that you go to high school and the path was first base was college and you get the degree, and the next second base was you get employed because you have the degree, and then you go to third, which is like you hopefully get good at your job, and then you retire, and then home base is, I don't know, you die or whatever. And in the graduation speech I gave many years ago, I just said life isn't linear anymore, which I think is brilliant and terrifying for most people. That you no longer have to run the bases in a traditional pattern. So if you believe in something, like, run towards third. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think college is such a specific pathway that some people really need and thrive in.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, here's a structured way to do this thing. But the reality is, just about every piece of information that we could get around a subject is available in a different format now. And we can curate our own education if we have the discipline and the structure and the accountability to do it. But most people struggle with a lot of those skills, understandably, like the discipline to actually pursue a thing in a rigorous and consistent manner.
Yep.
And it's just it's goofy. It's it's the same way why I pay to go to a gym when most of the stuff I do at the gym I could do at home.
But when you show up, I'm here to do this.
And I'm here and I'm paying for it.
Yes.
Which is the same thing as college.
Yes.
I've paid to look at this book. I can look at this book somewhere else.
I could literally go to the local library and read this for free based on the
and there's
library card.
The skill set of professors, and there's obviously lots of gifts to college.
Yeah.
The point is just learning is no longer linear, and life is no longer linear. And I think that the current generation has totally awoken to that idea of, I can start pursuing this thing and learning about it well beyond when I'm quote unquote supposed to.
Yeah.
And the gatekeepers to information don't exist in the way that they used to. And so we DIY everything. And so to the direct question, which is college necessary?
Yeah.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
To the question, is college like worthwhile or good? Yeah, I learned a ton in college, and the main learning in college for me was the experience of being in community with people who are like-minded and not like-minded. It was the experience of building relationships. It was the experience of taking 8 credits when I should have been taking 4, and the resilience and like the struggle, and like that's the learning that happened there for me, and I paid for it, and I'm proud to have gone to the place that I went.
Yeah.
And that's cool.
Yeah.
But could I have arrived here a different path? Yeah, I could have run
sure
towards
you would've.
third, and it would have probably looked something similar.
Yeah, to me, it was like that. It was the 4 years for me to grow up. But I struggle with, I don't want to tell people nowadays, you don't need to go to college, because I agree. Some people need that structure. Some people need that environment to kind of try things out and be around a supportive professors or, other fellow classmates. But I think we're going to start seeing this happen more often than not, which we're already starting to see with people like yourself, people like me. We create these our own lives now. I think that is, now it depends on the person, because I went to college with a lot of people I don't think would be able to have the type of lifestyle that I have, where I pretty much, I'm running every day. And that's why I low-key even loved we were responding to each other on a Saturday in emails, because I know there's a lot of people in this business world that would be like, nope, Friday afternoon, I'm off till Monday.
Yeah.
And me and you were exchanging just not even a big deal, because we love what we do. And to wake up every day, we're always on the clock. But I think it's amazing that we now live in this world where we can actually create the dream jobs. I mean, we're running a studio in my bedroom. You know what I mean? It's, you can make it work if you really want it to happen. But some people need that time, and some people need to go to school, and maybe you want to be a doctor. Well, you probably have to go get the licensing.
Yeah, you
and
should
the
do
formal
that.
education.
In fact, please do that.
Yeah. I don't want you cutting me open, all right? Don't be touching this beard unless you got the right licensing. So when you're graduating college, was it through Unite? It was Unite was the name of it, right?
Ignite.
Ignite. Was it through them that you started to get into the real keynote speaking? How did you jumpstart that whole path of career?
Yeah, well, I think through Ignite I got to hone some of the skill sets that I'd already sort of had from being a part of this camp experience. I've worked at that camp now for almost 15 years. But that was an in the trenches experience that was awesome. And then, there was so many supplemental things that helped support me being on stage, just being a theater major and being on stage a lot. I did improv, did a cappella, I did speech and debate in high school. So all these things, I spent a lot of time on stage. So leaving college, I got put in touch with this guy named Tyler. And I was connected to Tyler through a guy named Dighton, who ran the career planning center at my college. So is college worthwhile? Again, here's a network of relationships.
Yeah, yep.
And Dighton put me in touch with Tyler. Tyler hadn't taken on a mentee in 17 years, but because of Dighton's recommendation, he gave me a shot. And I flew to California to meet with him and sat down with him. And I was like, hey, he's been doing youth speaking for, at this point, 30 years. He's spoken to over 4 million teenagers in person. And I sat with Tyler and I said, this is what I want to do. I showed him some video of me speaking, and he literally sat with me minute by minute and watched the video of me speaking. And he was like, see what you did there? That's brilliant. Do that. Do more. And this here, reframe that. Don't be the hero of your own story. And see how you walked into this. You need a more humble perspective with this piece. And the audience isn't engaged here. You got to bring this up over here. And he just walked. He's a brilliant storyteller. For literally the first year that I started to pursue this, anytime I had a speech, I would call Tyler Durman and be like, I need to talk about respect. What do I do? And he would be like, okay, walk me through the stories in your life of respect, and let's talk about how to set this up and structure this. And huge gift to me to have leadership and a leader and a mentor and a role model and a friend who's willing to invest that time, right?
Yeah.
So that was the first year. I did graphic design on the side, and then that first year I spoke at 12 or 13 engagements. And along the way, I tried to create content, video and activities and things that I could leave behind at schools that provided value for people. After I was done with the speaking experience, it's okay, what's next? And I was really always pretty intentional about that. I believed in that change only happens when we provide tools to practice beyond the inspiration. And that next year, it was 35 schools. The year after that, it was 77 schools. And then for the past many years, it's been about 130 schools a year. Yeah, so it got busy.
Yeah.
Which
But it grew. That's what I love to hear is, I started off the podcast and I addressed, you've done over 600 schools, but we don't know the fact that first year you did 13, and the second year you did 30. And it was that incremental growth over the years that you honed in on the craft that more opportunities started to present themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What's that process like? You were just talking about it when you call them up and, hey, I got to talk about respect. Like, are schools like saying, we want you to talk about this? Are you going in with your kind of open format? You can talk about whatever. And how hard is it to draw back on stories? Because you also mentioned earlier in the podcast of how like we live our lives and we kind of forget things. And I personally was trying to do that earlier. Just think about, if I had to give a speech on something, I forget about these moments, and it isn't until somebody brings it up that I'm like, oh, I can remember the details.
Yeah.
So what's this process like for you to make sure that you can tell the stories, you're giving the school what they asked for, but also that you're being truthful in telling that story for your own life?
Yeah, when I first started, it's sort of like you take what you can get, and so they're like, do you talk about respect, or do you talk about pride or integrity? And I'm like, yeah. It's like,
what am I gonna write?
Figure out an hour.
Pick anything you guys want.
Yeah,
you name it, I'll talk about it.
And so I did a couple of those that was like, this is out of my. But you figure out what the narrative is that connects, right? Mm-hmm. Most of the stories are interwoven, anyways. Mm-hmm. But over the years, I think one of my favorite concepts is a sticker on the back of one of my friend Allie's laptops. It says, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. And so for a long time, I was just doing anything. And I think you find your space. And for me, it's become the kindness space, right? Compassion, character. Like, that's what I live in now. So at the beginning, it was like whatever came my way. And now, more than ever, it's like they know that I'm going to come talk about building a culture of compassion or a culture of character or a culture of kindness in the organization or in the school. And the process of building out those things really comes from Tyler. He says he makes a distinction between like a keynote, a speech, and a workshop, which I do a lot of both. And the distinction has always been really important to me. He says a workshop is like sowing the field. Like, you're throwing a bunch of seeds out, hoping something grows. And he goes, a keynote or a speech is like a gemstone. And that gemstone is what he would say is like a capital T truth, some sort of profound, simple truth that we all know, but we need to be reminded of. And he goes, a great speaker will take that truth and he'll hold it up to the audience and he'll spin it around slowly. So instead of giving you 10 different things about 10 different things, you're going to get 10 different things about one thing. So it's depth over breadth, right? And so when I prepare a speech, I always think about what's the gemstone, right? Like, what is the truth that I'm trying to communicate? And then what are the stories that best serve that truth? Because there's always going to be a story of humor. There's always going to be a story of sadness, and there's always going to be a story of struggle. There's always going to be a story of humility, and there's always going to be something that I've experienced. There's always going to be something that I know someone else has. And so I think about all of those stories, and I'll write them out, and I'll say, okay, which one of these, in the time that I'm given, best serve that capital T truth? And that's a fun process, right? Is like, okay, what blend of humor and what blend of humility and what blend of my story versus other people's story and what blend of just straight up content, practical content, all come together to show you, what's the most beautiful way I can show you this gemstone, to walk away with a deeper understanding of something that we already might know, but maybe haven't been convinced that it's worth living or worth reconsidering or worth, but maybe we don't know it in that way. You said it earlier, and you said that perspective, my friend Alex, he's one of my best friends, and I was going through a tough time, and he sent me a message, and he goes, the greatest gift you can give people is perspective. And he said, his compliment to me was like, that's the work you do, is you help change perspective. And I think that that's the gift of a great speaker, a great storyteller, a great message, whether it's through a podcast or a movie or music or a musical, is if at some point along the way, something that you have already known in some capacity to be true, you change your perspective on it, and all of a sudden it becomes more urgent in your life, or more meaningful, or more profound, or you understand it in a way that didn't make sense before, but now that you have the language or the perspective on it, it's now a non-negotiable, and I have to do this thing.
Yeah, and I think we have these moments in our life. I'm trying to think if there was one recently where it's like you get jolted. It's like adrenaline rush. You wake up and you're like, man, death is real. You know of somebody that passed away. Maybe it's not directly somebody that you know, but or somebody that I know personally right now is going through breast cancer, and it's like we have these weird moments where for like 2 to 3 weeks we're like on our tiptoes about life, and then everything calms down, and then we're all good and everything's back to normal, and then we just kind of keep flowing and we keep getting back into that hustle, and we're back in the grind. And you know, I really like that story that I came across you had told. I think it was at a high school this past fall. I'm going to butcher the story, but I'm trying to get it back. But it was, you were on an airplane, and you do a really good job of like adding all of these humors to serious to sad to like happy. And you were talking about how there was this woman you had met on the plane. But what really caught me is one of those moments where it's like you know, this woman gets off the plane and she finds out her father had passed away. And she's like at the airport and she's like crying, and you're in your mind going, would I have stopped? You know, like, would I have been that person to stop and just say like, are you okay? And that's something that I think speaks loudly about you, because there's not a lot of people that even would think, they wouldn't ask themselves that question. They'd think, oh wow, like that's sad, and kind of keep going. But the fact that you're even asking yourself that question speaks loudly, and I think it's really something that I want to acknowledge you for, because the work that you're doing, and like to even be able to just go up and tell a story and to touch people in all these different lanes of happiness and joy and sad and humor, that's like true art to me, like storytelling at its finest.
Yeah. And
I really respect that you're able to do that on such a massive scale for people.
Thanks, man. I think the story, her name's Helga. And the shortest form of the story is that she lost her dad, found out right before she took off on an airplane.
Yeah.
Lands in the airport where in the city that her dad has passed away in, and was crying in the airport and she articulates to me that she sat there for 2 hours, 3,000 people walk by her and no one stops. And the question that I wrestle with, even when I heard the story, which it makes you uncomfortable to even like, you hear the story,
to hear it,
and then you say to yourself, "Yeah, would I have stopped?" And I'll acknowledge your compliment that I think, like, would I have stopped? I also like dish credit to the fact that the only reason I think that way is because someone has given me the gift of perspective before I ever arrived at that moment, right? Which is, I think, our obligation to each other is, how do we give each other perspective that's valuable? And for me, I've had mentors and heroes and relationships in my life that have taught me to think that way. And I look forward to a life filled with a lot more perspective changes.
Yeah.
But honestly, for me, it's been the past year. I spent past 8 years I've been speaking, and I've been asking, I've been trying to sell people on kindness. And I only realized this year, I thought to myself, people already buy it. Like, people already... I've never asked someone, what do you think about kindness? They're like, it's all right. It's like, no, everyone agrees kindness is worthwhile. And I realized back in March is when I first started changing the way I talked about it. But I realized that the better pitch, the better question isn't whether or not kindness is good or bad. The question is like, what gets in the way? And the question is, do we have the tools to authentically ask ourselves that question? Because I would say, as you would, that there's a skill set involved there.
Yes.
In knowing the awareness to even ask that question in the first place, and then skills to like actually honestly and humbly and vulnerably answer that question, right? And so that's been part of my more recently, and in many ways what Character Strong aims to do is to equip young people with the tools to reflect in ways that are meaningful, that propel growth, right? Because we can all agree kindness is good, but then there's a gap, because even though we all agree it's good, we're not very good at it, right? And so you ask any one of the 3,000 people that walked by Helga in the airport crying, if they believe in kindness, they're all going to tell you yes. But then no one stopped. So there's a gap between belief and action. What we say is important and what we actually do. And I think the only way you fill that gap is through education. And what education does is change perspective.
What would you educate people, though? How do you educate people on kindness to get them to flip that perspective on it?
Yeah. So my answer to the question, what gets in the way of stopping to help Helga? My personal reflection is three things. It's incompetence, which is if I don't know how to do something, I avoid that thing. I use the gym as an example often. I work out at Gold's. There's 100 different machines in there. I know how to use 3. So which 3 do I use? The same three. Right.
The same 3.
One of them is an ab machine that's pretty basic, right? Like, and some of the other stuff I know is probably good for me, but if I've never been taught or I don't know how to do it, even unintentionally, I avoid it.
Yeah.
So if I don't know how to do something, and I think about kindness, and I think kindness doesn't get enough credit for all the skills that you need to actually do it well. For example, I think in order to practice kindness well, you need the skill of empathy. What Helga needs in that moment is someone to sit with her and suffer alongside her. She doesn't need someone to give her advice or to talk to her or talk at her. She needs someone to sit next to her and just
listen to her,
cry with her.
Yeah.
Sometimes not even listen, but just like sit there and cry and be in that suffering with her. And I don't feel very skilled at that, right? Because that's vulnerable and awkward, and there's some suffering that I haven't dealt with that, like, if I open myself up to suffering, that's risky and scary. And it's easier in that moment then to walk by Helga than it is to not know what I'm doing.
Yep.
So if I don't know how to do something, sometimes I avoid it. The second one is insecurity, which is just to say if I'm scared of something, I avoid it. I've always been afraid of the dark. My parents showed me Lord of the Rings way too early in my life. And so
on the road trip out,
dude, yeah,
it was on the road
Star
trip?
Wars, Yoda, and then Lord of the Rings, Smeagol, man, Gollum at age 6.
No, not
that
good.
messes you up.
Not good.
And anytime lights go out, I always picture like Gollum in the dark, or if there's a TV, it's Samara from The Ring. I hate that movie.
Not a fan of The Ring.
It has haunted me for my whole life.
Not a fan of The Ring.
And so it's weird, right? Like even in 29, if I'm walking by like in the dark, I see a TV. If it has like that fuzzy snow on
You're
it,
out. You're out.
I'm out. Yeah, I'm out. I'm avoiding.
See you guys
I'm not
next
going
week.
in that room, obviously. And then you draw the parallel to like, well, what else am I afraid of? Well, I'm scared of what people think about me. And if I stop and help a crying stranger in the airport, I open myself up to judgment and weird looks.
Yeah.
I'm scared of failure. And if I don't know what I'm going to say, if I don't know how to help this woman and I walk away having failed her, like, I don't want to carry that.
Yeah.
I might try to ask if she needs help and I might get rejected. I don't like that feeling. No one does. I feel like sometimes that I'm a mess. Like, and so how can I possibly help you when I'm going through my own stuff? So if I'm afraid of any of those things, rejection, failure, being laughed at, being judged, being awkward, any of those feelings that none of us like, then I'll typically avoid kindness. And the last one for me is inconvenience, which is just to say if I don't feel like it, I won't do it.
Yeah. I have a million other things to do right now. I got to keep going.
Yeah, and you think about it, if you get honest for a second, think about all the feelings that that make kindness harder. When I'm tired, kindness is harder.
Yep.
And I'm tired a lot, man.
Yeah,
I
we
work
all
hard.
are. That's why we got the coffee sometimes.
That's right,
We need
yeah.
that caffeine to keep us moving.
When I'm stressed, when I'm anxious, I'm more worried about me. In fact, the science would say as anxiety goes up, empathy goes down. So the more anxious I am, the less likely I'm going to practice kindness. When I'm hungry,
Yeah. I need to eat.
hangry,
Yeah, hangry.
Dude,
That's where that
kindness
comes
is
from.
harder.
Yeah.
Right? When I'm angry, when I'm upset, when I'm hurting, when I'm suffering, when I'm disgruntled, any number of the myriad of feelings that you and I feel on any given day, when you consider most of them actually make kindness harder. And so if I don't feel like being kind, most people aren't going to go out of the way to choose something that we don't feel like doing. And that's which is why I would say that kindness is almost always a sacrifice to do something you don't feel like. It's to choose someone else's good over your own. And so I think about those things, right? And then I turn it around and say, how do we teach that? How do we teach people, first of all, to honestly self-reflect? What aren't I skilled at? What am I afraid of? And what are my feelings that I feel on any given day? And do I have anything that I'm fighting for in my life that I'm going to choose over my feelings, right? Because one of my favorite quotes I've been thinking about recently is how much bigger our life gets when we make ourselves smaller in it. And I pair that with a quote, our life is our awareness. So our life is exactly what we're aware of, right? The things that we don't know don't exist to us. And so our life is about as big as the things we know and are aware of. And most people live their life so controlled by their feelings that they're only really aware of what they're feeling and what their experience is. And when you think about it, it makes your life really small.
Because you're only focused on you.
Because your life is about as big as you.
Yeah.
and unintentionally, because we haven't been taught emotional intelligence or self-awareness or emotional regulation or all these social emotional skills that we want to teach. And if you don't teach those things, then most people unintentionally live based on their feelings. And then your life is about as big as you. Unless you can help people wrestle with a fight or a purpose worth pursuing. And if you're helping people wrestle with that with the right framework, hopefully that purpose is bigger than just you and your success.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then not every time, but more often than not, I'll choose my purpose over just my personal emotions. Right? If I know what I'm fighting for clearly enough, I can align my actions to my fight than just what I'm feeling in any given moment. But those are all things that you have to explicitly teach. Because those aren't our default settings. You know, by default we're selfish. And the example I always use is like you take a group picture and you go to look at it. Even if there's 30 people in the picture, who's the first person you look at?
First part. What do you mean?
Yourself.
Oh,
if
yeah.
You're
if you're in the picture, I'm making sure my beard looks good. I'm making I should look good.
And if everyone else looks amazing and you're like half blinking, it's a bad picture.
We need to retake that. Yeah, every single time.
So our natural disposition is selfishness, and you got to teach against that. So all that to say, one of the aims of Character Strong is how do we teach the competencies of compassion? Because it's not, you don't just say kindness is a virtue or kindness is a value and you should do more of it. Because people are like, cool, I get that kindness is good, but just because I know something is good doesn't mean I'm good at it. Right? And just because I can define something, just because I believe in something doesn't make me skilled at it. The only way I get skilled at it is if you can say I believe in basketball, but there's 1,000 skill sets in the idea of basketball that allow you to actually be good at basketball. And you don't train them all at once simultaneously. You train them individually over many hours, over many days. And so that's what the curriculum is designed to say. Okay, what are the competencies of emotional regulation, of self-awareness, of empathy, of listening, and all these skills that individually you can work on as muscle groups, then when combined, allow you the skill set required to help Helga. Vulnerability, to teach that in school by helping teachers show up as vulnerable. I think there's nothing more powerful right now in this world than a vulnerable teacher who's honest about their insecurities, about what they struggle with, because suicide just took over as the second leading cause of death in teenagers.
Wow. Well, what's the number one?
I think it's car accidents still.
Okay.
I think. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to quote me because it's on video.
Yeah.
But I know that suicide is number two, and suicide is almost always a byproduct of the misunderstanding of mental health and loneliness. And loneliness is on the increase. Depression is on the increase.
Which blows my mind with the amount of technology we have that you think that, I don't know.
That's the thing, man.
You would hope that, I know the downside of social media is that we see all of our friends out and about and we're laying in our bed at night and we think, wow, I don't have any friends. But then I would hope that there's YouTube videos, podcasts, there's conversations that give that ounce of hope. But to hear that it's rising, it's, I guess, should I be surprised or should I not be surprised? Because social media plays such a powerful impact on that.
Yeah, it's all in balance, right? And I think this generation has grown up so out of balance with the consumption of it that, as well as I do, that the device will never replace the value of what we're doing right here.
100%.
And kids don't know how to do this.
Yeah.
I don't say that condescendingly at all. They grew up with a different a different paradigm of how they interacted with the world. And because the older generation didn't experience that same paradigm, they don't understand that even the foundational, hi, my name is, and the handshake, they were never taught to do that. They were friended for the first time on social media before they ever did this thing. And so, I agree. Social media can be technology being used to help people, and strangers across huge distances can support each other in ways that never used to exist. At the same time, we've lost a lot of the skills of the human piece, which no matter, devices promise connection, but they don't deliver the real thing.
Yeah.
And there's, again, I use that word a lot, but I think there's competencies involved with connection. And if you don't teach them, then the byproduct is the opposite. We're going to be disconnected. And when we're disconnected, we're lonely, which is why that, the idea of the most powerful teachers in the world right now are vulnerable teachers are because that's what students need. The number one thing students need to be successful who are coming into classrooms with trauma, which there's a lot of research around it right now. It's called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And that doesn't just look like abuse or death in the family. It also looks like divorce or growing up in an affluent household where both parents are working all the time. Like those things can be considered traumatic as well.
Yep.
And in every classroom, in every city in America, students are walking into classrooms more than ever with trauma, right? The statistic that scares me all the time is the average student today has as much anxiety as the average psychiatric patient in the 1950s. And as anxiety goes up, empathy goes down, which means loneliness increases. So unless as educators, unless we can support each other, and not only that, unless there are people teaching teachers how to show up and build more effective relationships and teach behavior, then teachers are overwhelmed by all the things that they have to do, and they forget about all the things they want to be, right? And so that's a part of the work as well with Character Strong is how do you equip teachers who are walking out of college super equipped to teach their subject area, but they've never been taught to teach social emotional skills.
Yeah, not at all.
Never been taught to teach behavior. And I think we all want to build relationships, but unless we have practical strategies and tools, it's easy just to get overwhelmed by all the papers we have to grade.
Yeah.
And all the other and parent-teacher conference and the staff meeting and all the things that teachers are responsible for, they're drowning in that stuff. And so one of our goals at Character Strong is to equip educators with like research-backed practical tools that, hey, if you just do this one thing this week, you're going to reach one kid. And we just want to put those in front of teachers all the time so that they can get back to like, you know, more than ever, the work of education is relational.
Did Character Strong become born because you were already kind of what you already talked about earlier, like you're speaking in front of schools, you're helping out students, and you don't want to just leave. You don't want to just leave them and then and that's it. Like, did Character Strong come to life because you wanted to leave something behind and realize this is a completely separate entity that I could really build something on? Yeah.
1,000%. Yeah. The line I use is inspiration without application is just good feelings. And good feelings serve you for a little while, but good feelings don't change the world.
Well, that's the thing. I'm a big, you know, I listen and I hear from a lot of people that tell me that, you know, actually I did an interview last night and the guy told me he had gone to, I don't know if it was a Lewis Howes event or something like that, like, you know, paid X amount of dollars, went to this event and, you know, great networking, got inspired and stuff. But what scares me is that, you know, we can listen to podcasts like this, right? Like somebody could listen to this conversation, get so fired up off of life, right? But how are they going to feel tomorrow? Maybe they'll still be a little bit more inspired. And the next day, they're still feeling a little bit of Houston's like push. But next week, are they still going to have that? And so what scares me is that a lot of times people get this jolt of inspiration, but there's no action to follow it. And when there's no action to follow it, where does it go? It just kind of disappears. It's just this little instant feeling, and
it's like going to the gym once.
Yeah, you feel good. Yeah, you feel good for a quick second, and then you're back to square one.
Yeah,
you have to deploy the action.
There's no gains, man.
Yeah,
I've tried it every year.
Yeah,
every
no
January,
gains.
I go once, and I'm like, this was good, and then I look the same way.
Yeah, no gains, no gains.
Consistency, right? It's the discipline. I know you've had Rob on here before, and he's my favorite example of consistency over time. I'm gonna sit down with 10,000 people for 1 hour, and that's his gig, and he does 4 a day.
Yep.
With pretty ridiculous consistency.
Yeah.
And I think there's something so profound about people who, and it's always purpose driven. It has to be, because if you don't know what you're fighting for, then there's probably lots of days where Rob doesn't feel like going and sitting with 4 different strangers a day.
Yeah.
But it's driven by fuel. In fact, Angela Duckworth, she's the lead researcher on grit and resilience, which all the research would tell us that the most successful people, it has nothing to do with GPA or IQ or SAT. The most successful people have the skill, the non-cognitive skill of grit, right? Like they know how to persevere with things over time. And when they experience adversity, it's not a brick wall. It's an opportunity to learn and move forward. And she says success is fueled by that skill more than anything else. So then the next question is like, well, then how do you develop grit? And she said, in interviewing thousands of people with grit, kind of like what you're doing here, the number one common denominator is they have a clear purpose.
Yeah.
They know why they do what they do.
Yeah, because that's going to get you through the tough times of when things aren't clicking in the right direction, or money's not coming in the way you would hope it expects, or I think that is the cure all of, I've essentially launched this to find my purpose. And so through it, I found my purpose, and then I realized the actual importance of finding that purpose. Because for most of my life, I had done sports, I had played, video games growing up, I had tried all these things, but it wasn't until this where I realized, wow, when you have a clear purpose and you are so in on it, all that other stuff you used to worry about actually just doesn't matter anymore, because all of my time and energy is so focused on one thing that I don't have time to just dish out to things that don't matter.
Yep.
And I think that's extremely important, is finding that purpose, which is not easy to do. But it can give you that sense of direction as to where you're supposed to be heading and where you're supposed to be going, and the people you're supposed to be surrounding yourself with. Because when you have a clear purpose of what you're trying to do, you realize, oh, this guy's doing this. He has like a similar path. Great. He has a similar path. And that's why, to go off of Rob too, I respect him so much for the fact that he's able to have these conversations 4 times a day. And the detail that he writes out in these Instagram posts of the people that he's met, I could never do it. My mind, I don't think is able to hold in that much information and to spit it back out 4 times a day and to write a post that like detailed. That's somebody who has found a very clear purpose and has just been relentless. I mean, he's at over 2,000 people now. Yeah. And it's cool to link up with people that I'm like, oh, you were the kid who interviewed me last night. He told me he was from Philly. He was one of the 10,000. I was like, no way. And so I'm like, we have this weird connection now. We have this, we have this weird thing.
Yeah. I would challenge you just for a second around, like you said, you can't do it. And I would just say anyone can do what Rob's doing if their purpose aligns with it. Yeah. And they're willing to put in the work, right?
Yeah,
so
I
it's
take
just
that
not
back.
what you
I take that back.
want to be about. It's what Rob wants to do, and that's like he's fueled by that, and you're fueled by something different. Yeah. And I think it's really cool what he does, and I think in many ways we all share a similar purpose. Yeah. But the vehicles look different that we're driving.
Yeah, and that's good though, because we all need to have. If we were all trying to do the same thing, it's funny how I can see the people that are in your circle. Everybody has the same idea of just trying to just put good energy into the world, but it's all so different on the lane of doing it, and that's what makes it so beautiful, because he does this, she does that, this person does this, and it all still stems back to the core of just kindness and good and purpose and energy, and I don't know, it's kind of beautiful to me to see that like so many people are able to find it and just continuously work day in and day out on something they actually truly care about.
Yeah, man. Culture shifts with 1,000 hands, not one.
Completely. Has there been, not to go back again to like the 600 number, I know that's the big number of the night or the day. Has there been one event or speech or moment that stands out the most to you?
That's a good question. That what's in my 1% question, like the moments where I've been made to feel something. Yeah, there
doesn't have to be the top one, but what's one that kind of really stands out the most to you?
There's lots of cool, pretty profound moments. I'll tell you my most favorite type of moment over the years. I think anytime you tell stories, people intersect with those stories, and they hear a story that you're sharing that feels similar to theirs, and they're moved. And sometimes it's an emotional process, especially for younger kids. So I get a lot of kids who come up to me and they're crying or they're going through something hard, and they just want someone to hear their story. That's always really cool. The things that are more profound to me personally, more moving to me, are when a kid walks up to me and they're crying and they don't know why. And I do, because I've had that experience where someone said something to me, and it was that first year when I went to this camp, and my paradigm was shifted around leadership and love and what service looked like, and really what my purpose was in life. And I didn't understand it at the time. You don't know what it is in the moment, but your life is never going to be the same. Something in your heart has shifted, right? Permanently. And every once in a while, I'll be at a school where someone walks up and they're crying, and it's not an emotional crying. It's a crying of like, it's almost like overwhelmed with something has changed, and I don't know what it is, but this is what I want my life to be about. And those are profound moments to me, where you see this kid who's just overflowing with love or compassion and kindness, and has never really had language for it before. And now all of a sudden they've, for whatever reason, from my touch point and the 1,000 before me, all of a sudden they feel like they have permission to live life more gently or more kindly or more beautifully. Those are my favorite. And then you have today, where just even today, this girl walked up, and she's from India, and she talked about the caste system and how there's, at the lowest level of their culture, are the untouchables. And here's this 7th grade girl, and she said, for so long I always just thought that we can't interact with those people because of what my culture told me to. And she said, because of what we talked about today, I want to be the person that goes and seeks out the untouchables.
What exactly are the untouchables?
They're people who are on the lowest level of quote unquote society, and you know, they have a caste system, which is basically a delineation of who's up top and who's up bottom. It's what we have in the States. We just don't call it out loud like they do in India.
Yeah.
And so the lowest level is the untouchables, people in poverty, people who are suffering with disease. And she says, I want to go be the person that helps them.
Wow.
And then I get the girl who walks up to me who says, my mom was just diagnosed with cancer. And my mom in 2016 went through stage 4 colon cancer. And I get to sit with her in that. And here's me trying to get more competent at this thing called empathy. And today, you know, I can get 20 kids who walk up to me sharing stories, and this one resonated with me today, and all she needed me to do today with her was to listen and cry with her, to feel overwhelmed with her, to hold her in a hug for a little while, and then to let her know that whatever magic has worked so far for my mom, I'm going to share that with you. And that gift has been given to me before, and the fact that I get to give that gift to young kids who don't always have champions in their corner, for one reason or another, those are cool moments.
How have you developed your emotional skills since all this has started, really? Like, how in tune are you to controlling your emotions?
Yeah, that's my friend Dexter says we're not human beings, we're human becomings. I like that a lot. I feel like a real giant work in progress in that department. I think I've put in the reps in terms of being present to kids while they're sharing things with me, for better or for worse. I think I've developed a skill set for listening. I've also developed a skill set unintentionally for turning off parts of me to protect myself from feeling overwhelmed by some of the pain that I encounter.
Yeah.
And for a long time, that made me pretty invulnerable, because I didn't have the emotional capacity to handle it all. And when you start to turn off like one part of you, a lot of times other parts of you turn off as well, right? So like you turn off the sadness and the suffering piece, and then you also turn off the joy and the the contentment piece at times. And so that showed up in like my previous relationship, where I was giving so much to the students in the schools that I served at, that I'd come back exhausted, and then you end up not loving people who are closest to you as well as you're loving strangers. And so, you know, that's a balancing act in our life that we all have to navigate. And it's a question I was actually having this conversation this weekend, as someone who believes in service and loving on the world and sacrificing for the world. There's an interesting balance there, right? Where it's like, at what point, how do you hold self-care and other care in balance appropriately? If like, I know that I can grind, man. Like I can get on. This last week, I was in 5 states in 6 days, at a middle school, a high school, working with teachers. I did the whole range, and I know I'm capable of that. I did it. I've done it for 8 years, and I've flown a lot of miles, and I've driven a lot of rental cars. And so I know that I have the stamina to do it. There's a lot of days I feel exhausted, and I've sacrificed some relationships and friendships along the way because of the hustle.
Yeah.
And on the other side, I know, and there's anecdotal and analytical evidence of it, like I know I've helped people. So if I know I can do it, and I know it's helping people, at what level do I have an obligation to keep doing it? And then at what level am I allowed to say, no, I deserve whatever that looks like. I deserve a moment of rest or a moment of peace or a moment of play or whatever is rejuvenating for me. And it's kind of an interesting clarifying question for all of us. If we believe in helping the world, if we know we're capable of doing X, are we obligated to do X? If we know it's doing good, or we are, at what point are we allowed to take care of ourselves for Y period of time? And in taking care of ourselves, do we turn around and do X better? So am I skilled at emotional awareness? I think I'm learning a lot about it all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that the skill that I'll continue to get better at is the forever skill of balancing, and the forever skill of honoring my own emotional state enough to turn around and then give better in return.
Yeah. You talk about sacrifices with relationships and friendships. Has there been one that you regret, like a sacrifice you've had to make that you regret?
Yeah, of course. Two come to mind. The first one is in 2016 when my mom was diagnosed. I was living in LA, just literally moved to LA the same week my mom was diagnosed, and my mom lives in Maine. So I spent a lot of time going back and forth to be with her. And even now, my grandpa was just diagnosed a couple weeks ago with pancreatic cancer. And I was in Wisconsin this weekend working with teachers, which I loved, while my whole family was in New Mexico with my grandpa. And I don't know what to do with that information yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I have gone and visited him, and I plan to go back at Thanksgiving and do another week. And, but that's that balance piece again, right? It's like, where do you find, is there a perfect balance? And, how much are you willing to give up in the pursuit of helping people and or being successful and or whatever your metric is for success or achievement or helping the world. So there's, I wish I could have hung out with my mom more. I want to hang out with my grandpa more. And then I was married for 3.5 years, and a little over a year now we've been apart. And it's an interesting space to be in, where you can arrive at a place where distance allows perspective and clarity. And I think we've both acknowledged that this is a better thing for us. We both need this for ourselves to pursue the things that we actually cared about. And we got married young, and I think we both walked into it a little naive.
24 probably?
Yeah, I was 25. She was 23.
Okay.
And I think we've learned in the space that it's like, we actually want to pursue things that are pretty disparate from each other. And our idea of happiness or contentment looks pretty different. So the sacrifice to be with each other maybe isn't worth where we're at this point in our life. And that's like a hard realization. And so I say all that to say that I don't regret the fact that we're here now, because I think we've both agreed that it's healthier and better for our lives.
Yeah.
I do regret the way that along the way I made someone I cared about feel that my pursuit, my purpose, was in a direction that was different than her.
Yeah. And
that's a tough one. That's a tough one to navigate, that balance, and how to honor someone you care about while pursuing what you love. And if they're going different directions, again, the question of what are you willing to sacrifice?
Yeah.
And I regret only not clarifying or owning sooner that I wasn't willing to sacrifice this pursuit for her.
Yeah.
And she knew it. And, we mutually had our own stuff going on.
Yeah.
But those would be the things that, in the pursuit of anything purposeful, something's going to get sacrificed.
Yeah. You're not going to be able to.
You can do anything, but you can't do everything.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we can't, we don't have 200 hours in a week where we can balance and do everything that we hope to see, do, and build on the relationships. But I think it takes a lot for somebody to really see through the vision they have. And there's a lot of people in this world, when something like that happens, they just kind of toss in the towel and they run towards the partner or run towards something else. But then the other side of me tells me too, it's just like you also can't control how do I say this correctly? I'm a big believer of I can only control my actions. And so I want to put my time and energy into things of my control, whether it's building on a passion project, whether it's doing this. But that also is the biggest struggle, because then I know living across the country from my family, I sacrifice not going home for a lot of holidays because I know financially it's expensive to go from one side or the other when I could be working and trying to build on this. And so it's always this juggle, I think, for people that are chasing something bigger than themselves of, do I give into it or do I keep working on the thing? And so it's not easy to do, I don't think, and I'm still very new to this, but to hear that, it's another reminder that if you really truly believe in something, you're going to do what you have to do to make it happen and actually bring it to life.
I think the thing that I've learned through the challenge of this whole process is I think we also have to get really honest with ourselves about we can say something is our purpose is bigger than us all we want to, but there are levels for me personally where I would use my purpose as an excuse when I'm really pursuing me, right? And like the hurt or the suffering or the lies that I tell myself, among them, I think that my worthiness is attached to achievement. And so the more I achieve, the better I feel about myself, because that's my understanding of love. Growing up, because I got good grades and was celebrated and like was a good student, a good kid, my parents were always super supportive, and they would always acknowledge me for doing X, Y, and Z. And so my paradigm of love is, if I do X, then I get love because Y, right? Like that's the equation. And when I speak at 130 schools and you use that number 600, I'm like, damn right, yeah. I'm winning.
Yeah.
And it is my metric of love. And so I only qualify it because I used that excuse a lot in my previous relationship of like, I got work, like this is purposeful work. But if I was really honest with myself, 75-80% of why I was doing the work was actually about me, not this.
Yeah.
And so I think again, the emotional intelligence piece that I continue to want to dig into and learn is we got to get careful about why we're pursuing what we pursue, because we can all have purpose that's bigger than us. But if we're not paying attention, sometimes that purpose is pretty personal.
Yeah.
And we're doing it because we're motivated by things that we haven't even acknowledged are not actually as selfless as we want ourselves to believe.
Yeah.
And I wrestle with that truth all the time. You know, Mother Teresa says, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family. And I didn't do that super effectively, you know, on a lot of levels. And so I think we constantly have to throw that purpose against the wall and say, yeah, but why really? You know, how much am I getting out of this? And again, the balance piece. Altruism is always going to be selfish because there's always some sort of good that we feel in return for serving a bigger purpose. But when that balance starts to be more like, most of this is because of what I need, then I think we need something to hold us accountable in our life to say, yeah, you're doing good work, but are you doing it for the right reasons?
Yeah.
Are you in balance? Are you loving the people that you want to love? And where do you need to make sacrifices? Brene Brown says the most compassionate people are the most boundaried, which is just to say they know what to say no to. And Brene Brown, she's a best-selling author, second most watched TED Talk of all time. She's brilliant. Has interviewed thousands of people around shame and vulnerability and empathy. And in her research, she says the most compassionate people are the most boundaried, which in and of itself I think is brilliant and sort of counterintuitive. But it makes sense. When we say yes to too many things, we're still doing them, but we do them with resentment. Or we do them when we feel overwhelmed and stressed. And then we do them when we sacrifice the relationship over here. And Brene Brown, she gets thousands of inquiries on her site to speak. She takes less than 1% of them. When she could be making money, she could be successful, she could be a bigger name than she is now, but she says no. Her famous story is she was on Oprah, and she was so successful. Oprah liked her so much, she wanted her to come back the next day. And she was like, can we see her tomorrow? And Brene Brown's like, no, actually, tomorrow's the day I carpool with my daughter. I take her to school. And Oprah's like, yeah, no, but like, I'm Oprah, right? Like, you're going to come back tomorrow. She's like, no, that time with my daughter is really important. So maybe we can schedule it for a different time. But it's her first time ever being on Oprah. And she goes no to a second day because the most compassionate people set the clearest boundaries. And that's something that no matter how purposeful we are. Yeah.
That speaks loudly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
That takes a lot of discipline to say, you know, or like, not like you said, like to, nope, my daughter.
Clarity around, well, yeah, what is your purpose?
Wow. I'm gonna have to watch her speech because I'm not familiar with her talks at all. But second highest talking TED Talk, or most watched.
Yeah, she's unreal, man. She's brilliant.
Wow. I want to talk about Choose Love. Launched earlier this year. You guys want the world to live love a little better every day, which I think just like sounds perfect. What does love mean to you?
Love to me is our infinite,
or as you would say, love is blank.
Love
right?
is blank.
Love is blank.
Love is our infinite capacity to see goodness in other human beings and in ourselves, and to develop the skill set to acknowledge that goodness in others or in ourselves.
And how do you think, like, how can people feel more love if they don't feel, going back to what we talked about earlier, like there's people in this world right now that might not feel like they have the love, and it could be right in front of them, but they don't feel it. How does somebody gain that feeling of like, yeah, I am loved by all of these people around me?
Yeah, I love that quote. I used it today with a student who was having a tough time. I think it's from Perks of Being a Wallflower. Like, we accept the love we think we deserve. And for a lot of us, our narratives growing up was that we're undeserving of love for one reason or another. And at some point, we all get to take ownership over the stories that we tell ourselves. And we can either be the victim to stories that culture has given us, that our parents have given us, that other people have given us with or without our permission. Or at some point, we get to say, well, I write my own story, and the story I'm writing today looks like this. With Character Strong, we always use the example of, lifting 5-pound weights so that you can lift 10s. And I think the same thing's true with self-love. It's not a switch that you turn it on once and all of a sudden you're at 100%.
Yeah.
You do the small acts of self-forgiveness and the small moments of humility and the small moments of chipping away at shame until eventually you lift the 10-pound weights or 15 pounds. Yeah, but you're totally right in the sense that the whole premise of loving others only works if you're figuring out how to love yourself first.
Yeah.
And there's lots of brilliant people doing that, helping to do some of that work. I lean on a lot of other people who are experts in that field to talk about how to do that well. My friends Sophia and Ashley are doing some really cool work around turning pain into purpose. And they run this thing called Meaningful Mantras, where Sophia has some like cool insight into even to like the psychology of when we say I am worthy or I am beautiful. It actually doesn't work as much as saying you are beautiful, because I is still ego based versus you is almost like that external thing speaking into us. And so some of her stuff just has these mantras that you can repeat to yourself that say you are.
I agree.
Which I think just even the neuroscience behind some of that stuff is pretty awesome. I'm
smiling because I do this sometimes before podcasts. I look at myself in the mirror and I'm like, you got this. You're going to be the best in the world. And I have this like talk. So like, as you're saying that, I'm like, yep, it definitely
research,
works.
Man.
It definitely works.
It's science.
I'll raise my hand. It works. You got this.
You can do this.
You can do this.
Yeah. So there's the self-love piece, and then, which is a part of what we want to do with Choose Love. Choose Love is really just figuring out love is such a massive idea. This is what the belief is love is so big. I think about it as like, it's like the menu at the Cheesecake Factory, which is like when there's too many choices.
Too many.
There's actually no choice at all.
Too many.
We always, we do what we know, which is I'm going to order the spicy chipotle farfalle chicken pasta. And it's delicious every time.
Yeah.
But there's also 100 other options on the menu. I think the same thing's kind of true with love. We practice love in the way that we've experienced love, right? We give what we know, which is why like the 5 love languages by Dr. Gary Chapman is pretty interesting. The idea that we typically give love to others in the way that we most like to receive it. So I like words of affirmation. So the thing I'm typically good at, I'm most fluent in the language of love that I like to receive it in. But if we really want to get better at loving ourselves and the rest of the world, we have to understand that just because I receive love in this way, or my experience with love happened like this, doesn't mean that you're going to receive love in the same way. And so to become competent or fluent in a lot of different love languages, we got to take love and we got to make it smaller so that we can practice things, right? When you go to the gym, you don't do all the machines.
No.
It's leg day, right? Or whatever people do in the gym.
Yeah. Whatever they do.
Yeah. So practice 1, for example, is kindness. And then practice 2 is commitment. And then practice 3 is empathy. Practice 4 is vulnerability. And so all of these words, ideas, values are pieces of love, but they contribute to the whole, right? When I work on this muscle, it's a holistic approach. I got to work on this one, this one, this one, and this one, and then I'll be collectively stronger. So we just try to break down love into more tangible and practicable pieces on a monthly basis, and then create a community around it to support the work. And we think that the more we, without practice, we say love is just a good idea. And we all want to make the world a more loving place, but it requires a lot of work.
It takes a lot of work.
Yeah. And sacrifice and time and energy and all the stuff we've been talking about. So we just want to give the tools and put it in front of people, be like, hey, here's some of the questions you could ask yourself.
Yeah.
Here's some of the stories that have inspired me or other people. And then here's a couple ways to actually do it and live it.
Yeah.
So here's the workbook. And then we'll help you if you want help. Yeah. We're there for you.
Yeah. We got you.
But let's go.
You have to do it.
Yeah.
You're doing a lot of things, man. I really respect it. Before I get into the closing questions, this is when I reverse the role. I allow my guests to ask me any one question, clean the slate. You can ask me anything you want. One rule, it cannot be a question that I asked you today.
Sure.
Any one question.
So I can't ask you why you brought an airsoft gun to school.
You cannot.
Not applicable.
You cannot, unfortunately. A crazy story.
I had a great conversation the other night with a friend, and we were talking about goofy PowerPoint presentations. We were talking about what I did for work, and she was making fun of me a little bit about just having a PowerPoint in the background. So one of the examples that we gave was if I were to put up a picture of a tiered system, TIER, like tiers of tears, TEAR, crying. It's like a tiered tier system.
Okay.
Meaning there's tears that don't mean a lot to us, and on the highest level of the tier of tears, there's tears that have meant a lot to us.
Okay.
That have been profound or memorable for one reason or another. So the question is, what type of tears or what moment of crying or tears for you exists at the highest tier of tears?
Wow, this is really complex.
What's the most profound moment of crying you've experienced in your life?
I think the moment, wow, yeah. It was like the highest level of tears. Sheesh. It's a really good question. It was my sophomore year of high school. Wow. My uncle was he was in the hospital. This was my dad. My dad was one of 10 children, and incredible family. And so my uncle was having a kidney failure. He had a kidney transplant years and years ago when I was a kid. And so, they said, oh, he's got a bug in him, so he has to come back to the hospital. We got to look at his kidney. And while he's in the hospital, he ends up catching like an actual virus from the hospital. So not even the reason he was in the hospital. And so there was like these 2 weeks or 3 weeks of it was getting worse and he was getting worse. And then it started to become this whole thing of like, if you want to see him, you should probably fly out to see him. And we're from the Massachusetts. We're all of our families on the East Coast. He's living in Sacramento, California. So Northern California and Folsom. And, I remember especially when you're that young, you think like, nah, it's not going to happen. And so a lot of we've talked about today, it kind of just like, you just push it to the side. It's like, nope, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And I just remember coming home from a soccer game. I went high school soccer game, right? Like just went out with my friends and my buddy dropped me off. And I just remember getting home and just both my parents were at the kitchen counter and I could see they were quiet and they were red in the face. And my father just came up and he just fucking dropped to the ground. And shit, man. That was tough. I've never cried on camera. I love it. Because it was not easy. Because what I was really caught up was because how much he had meant to my father. Mm-hmm. And how much he had meant to me.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it showed me a lot about life. And we talked about this earlier. It's like, there are these moments in our life that it's like awakening. And then we just go on through our life and we just keep going. And that was for sure one of them. Mm-hmm. It's even hard to think about. Because till this day, I still know, excuse me, how much he means to my father, to the point that almost every time that I talk to my father, he always brings up this comment about, hey, it's like when I used to call Ricky in California, and it's good. He smiles, you know, but it's always like, I used to call Ricky in California. I'd always update him on the time, you know, it's 8 o'clock East Coast. You know, it's got to be 5 o'clock out there, you know, for you, Rick. And he'd always just talk trash to my father. Like, yeah, I know how to do the time difference. I know the 3-hour time difference. And so my father does it to me all the time. He's like, how's the weather out there? And then he goes, oh, it's 8 o'clock here. And I'll cut him off and be like, and it's 5 o'clock here. Like, I know how we walk this line. I know how this line walks. So it's kind of, it's also emotional that I even live here now, because when my uncle, when he passed, you know, my father, so when he's one of 10 children, and this one ends up being the close brother for my father. They're the best man in each wedding. And so it was like a religion. It was like every Sunday they would call each other and just catch up. Mm-hmm. And so when he passed, it ended up stopping because he was gone. And it's interesting to me that now you fast forward so many years that I now live in California and that I speak to my father on Sundays. Mm-hmm. But that was the moment of, like, it was the first time I ever lost somebody. And I feel very fortunate because I haven't had a tough life compared to a lot of the people in this world. I've lost, you know, a handful of close family members, but I know there are people that have literally lost their mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters, and I can't even imagine what I would do in that scenario. And there are times that I even, in the last 6 months, it doesn't happen often, but there have been 2 to 3 times where I'm driving home late at night and just mentally, whether it's a tough day or a tough week, I have tears coming down my eyes because of how much I believe in myself to create something bigger than me. And I sometimes think that maybe that's the problem too, of me doing it too much for me. As much as I'm motivated to create something bigger for people, and it's amazing to get like these DMs and comments of how it's inspiring others, I also feel like, am I sometimes doing it too much for myself? Because I want to grow myself into this major thing, not because money, but because I just want to impact large scale. And so you have these 2 instances where it's like the tears of death and losing somebody that was close to you. And then you have these tears of wanting to really push myself to build something bigger than myself, to prove to myself that I have the ability to do it, all the while inspiring others.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably the toughest question in 100+ episodes I've ever gotten.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah. This is
thanks for going there.
Yeah, I didn't really expect that to happen, but I've also if this was 2 years ago who I was, I would cut that out. But I have gotten so much more. I am so authentically me that I'm not scared anymore to like be who I am and show people and just be me, you know, like that. I think that's the most important thing at the end of the day, is that people just need to be who they are. And if there's people that have a problem with that, then cut them out and keep moving. But the sooner you can fall in love with the person you are, the sooner you begin to just fall in love with the life you're living. And it ends up just everything slowly. It still is tough. It's still, you're going to have your day-to-day grind, your day-to-day ups and downs, and there's going to be all these other things that get thrown in your life, and you can't just love yourself, and life is just magically this rainbows and leprechauns and all this cool stuff. It's not that. But you end up just living a more fulfilled life. And yeah, I don't know. I could keep chopping along. Closing questions.
Can I say something?
Please.
To clarify, the most profound or the highest tier of tears to you is a moment of loss. And a loss from someone who left a legacy in your life that in some ways you now get to live into as the person who says, "It's 5 o'clock, Dad, I know."
Yeah.
And to me, it's just a neat, as we come to a close here, at the beginning you said you were talking about leaving a legacy. And to me, it's a great reminder that legacies don't always look like big, sprawling things, right? They don't always have to be something profound or monumental or follower-based or whatever metric you want to assign to it. Yeah. That I think probably the most profound or the highest tier of legacy that we'll leave in our life has a lot to do with love. Yeah. And so that's the work. That's the reminder. Yeah. I love that. Love is so much this episode. Love, kindness, everything. This has been a very much different podcast than I've done ever before. And I'm not saying you're better than any. I'm not scaling anything, but like the conversation has been much different than anything I've ever had. And I knew walking into this, it was going to be putting me into a different environment of conversation, because a lot of times it's just creatives and it's all this other stuff, and it's great. It's passion. It's people living with purpose. But this has been something that is really a different world, and I'm really happy we can make this happen, because I can't really put it into words, like the respect that I have for what the type of work you're doing, because I know I could do it. I'm not going to say I can't, because I don't like how I said that earlier. But there definitely takes a lot of emotional intelligence to be able to control yourself and balance all those things and have other things that are happening in your personal life and still be able to show up and deliver what you're supposed to do. That would be my definition of greatness. Like being able to still deliver on what you're saying you're going to do, all the while still having to battle what is happening with family, friends, or whatever it might be. So thank you for coming on to the show today and sharing your story. Where can people find you? Social media? Where can they find Character Love? Where can they find Character Strong? Where can they find everything? You can find me usually. And I choose love. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say character. I was just. That's all right. Choose love. Character Strong. I knew I said that wrong. Character Love. They're not Character Love. Character Strong. Choices. Yeah, come on. You can find me usually at a coffee shop in Venice, or in my backyard. You can also find me. Great backyard, by the way. Thanks, man. Yeah. Most of my stuff, I spend, like, most of anything I write or post is Instagram. Yeah. So it's Houston Kraft. Yep. Houston like the city, Kraft like cheese. And then at Character Strong, and then at ChooseLove.org, ORG at the end. So those are the three places that I exist. People will have it all linked up if you're able to go onto his Instagram and drop a bunch of bearded man emojis, so he knows that you're coming from the podcast. I hope so. Final question for you: what's
for somebody that's listening, doesn't have a passion figured out, doesn't have that purpose figured out just yet, what do you say is the best 2 to 3 pieces of advice for them?
If you don't have a purpose yet, if you don't have a passion yet, first advice is be patient with yourself. I think our culture promotes the idea that we're supposed to hustle and we're supposed to have a lot of things figured out and we're supposed to be running in a direction. But I think about life like being dropped in the middle of Paris. There's like the Champs-Élysées, the big structure right there, and there's all these roads that go in a bunch of different directions. Sometimes we get overwhelmed by which like road we're gonna choose, and I say just start walking, man, because either no matter what, you're in Paris, and it's beautiful, and you might turn around and go a different direction, but never be sad that you walked the streets of Paris. So be patient with yourself. Number 2, ask for help. The best compliment I've ever received from Tyler is that I ask for help. I ask for advice and I actually listen to it. So humble yourself and know that, man, none of us have all the answers. So spend more time listening. My favorite quote from James Hunter is, if you've ever been worried about being interesting, stop, work on being interested. Takes all the pressure off. So just get good at listening, man. Ask more questions, ask good questions, and listen to people. And the last one is how much bigger our life gets when we make ourselves smaller in it. So look for a purpose that serves someone more than you, because otherwise our life is our awareness, and our life is pretty dang small when it's all about our success, our money, our followers, our subscribers, our retweets, all the things that the world's going to tell us it's all about. Your life gets way bigger when you're serving others.
Houston Kraft, absolute pleasure, man.
Of course.
Thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure, man. A lot of fun.
We'll catch you guys next time.
See ya!